Hi, in this read aloud, I'm going to read this book to you. It's called Make Way for Ducklings. And we've been learning all about expression and what the punctuation tells us about how to read and also about how to give your characters a happy ending. So I want you to think about the expression that's being used and how the ending how it works for the ducklings, or if it does. So let's read this. Make Way for Ducklings. And this is by Robert McCloskey, and it is a Caldecott Award winner, which means it won for best illustrations, and the illustrations are really nice in children's books. And it's kind of an old story. It was written in 1969, so that's pretty long ago. And here we begin. And now I want you to see the pictures. I'll show those to you. There's Mr. and Mrs. Mallard. So, let me start. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family there where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a nice little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. The next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. So now they're in a big park in the middle of a big city, the city of Boston. Well, here, let me show you this. See those people on the swan boat? Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast better than the first. There's the action in the park. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard found a place that suited her. But, uh-oh. "Look out," squawked Mrs. Mallard, all in a dither. "You'll get run over." And then she got her breath and she added, "This is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else." So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place for them. Here they go. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no place to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place." There's the island right there. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. They were delicious. That looks like just the right place to hatch our ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest, and only just in time, for they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. There they are. And there she is on her nest. What do we see here? But, of course, they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called him on Michael every single day. Oh, look what happened, you guys. What happened? All those eggs. After Mrs. Mallard laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on her eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure that they were all there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One day the ducklings hatched. They hatched out. First came Jack, then Clack, then Lack, then Mack, then Knack, then Auk, then Pack, then Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very, very busy, I bet. Look at all those ducklings. What's happening here? One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she sure did. There she is with her ducklings. She taught them to swim and to dive. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. You see that? When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Quack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water as they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There, there they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. Uh-oh, trouble. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 quack went Jack, cack, lack, mack, knack, ack, pack, and quack, just as loud as their quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They were very scared. Somebody's coming to the rescue. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. There goes motorcycles. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at the headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what? Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Ack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. You see them? And the people love it. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. There she is. There's her ducks. Look at this. Everybody's making way for the ducklings. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Right into the public park. Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for him, just like he promised. There he is. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there all day long. They swam and they followed boats and they ate peanuts. Here they are. Make way for ducklings. They had a big problem, but they solved it. They solved it with the help of Michael and the policeman. I hope you liked that, and I hope you liked the great ending.